Welcome to the first episode of a side series I'm starting called Building Washburn. I'm starting this to show off some of what goes on behind the scenes creating failure and success of Great American Transit. I spend a lot of time working on the map for the city of Washburn in City Skylines, and I thought I would like to give all of you a bit of a closer look at what goes on in there. So today we're going to start off the series by rebuilding an older area of the map. This is a neighborhood called Homewood Park. It's southeast of the downtown. It contains an auto factory, and I tried to model it a little bit after some of the neighborhoods surrounding auto factories in the Midwest. In Washburn, this is one of the first neighborhoods I built on this map, and it hasn't really shown up much in the series because honestly my build style has just improved so much since then that I haven't really wanted it to be shown on camera. Like, a lot of it was zoned, there's default buildings in here. So it's just time to replace that and give it a little update. What I'm going to work on in this episode is building a small freight rail branch. In Washburn, there are two rail lines that come in from the east side of the map, and to reach each other, they have to cross the river, go down it, and then come back across it and make this big long loop. So I thought a little branch could solve that. And since the trains will be taking a shortcut, it should give the line enough traffic to, look kind of interesting. And along the way, I thought I could integrate some light industry sort of along the side of it and connect the auto factory a little bit better to the rail network and just rebuild the neighborhood a bit and prepare it for future episodes. All right, so let's jump in. All right, so for the building segment, first things first is I had to clear some land out to put this rail branch through. This was a neighborhood that I already completely built out pretty early on when I was working on Washburn. And so honestly, there's really no room for this branch, which, kind of makes it hard to move it through. So I spent a lot of time just clearing space, trying to figure out what sort of the path of least resistance through this area would be to build this rail branch. And luckily, I think it went through pretty well. So you can see up here, I connected it back up to the main line, and it's kind of this small little single track spur. It's pretty much single tracked the entire way. I really wanted it to be like a relatively disused line, but something that goes through a fairly populated area that you might see in a city where maybe there's still some active industry along it, or maybe it's completely disused. And in that case, could it be repurposed for something in the future? And that was kind of the goal behind this build, was really not so much for adding something to here and now, but to open up possibilities for future builds using this branch line. So maybe in the future, I could use it for a light rail system or a busway, just something like that. So you'll see kind of here, I'm just going through and laying down the track. It's pretty sloppy. I didn't get rid of any buildings. I just wanted to get the path down and then go back later and remove whatever stood in the way and kind of fit the neighborhood around it again. You'll see here, I have a ton of trees everywhere. I was messing around with the prop-in tree anarchy and turned on the unhide all trees, and suddenly I have trees everywhere. So I've been working on fixing that up. Honestly, if anybody has any really good tips for what to do with that, that'd be great, because it's a perpetual issue for me that I either have these trees everywhere or I end up with all my trees getting hidden and suddenly my builds kind of look not so great. So up here is where the line connects back to the main line, and I'll show that at the end of the build sequence here. But I was really just going through and rebuilding a lot of stuff alongside of it. Like I said, this neighborhood is really one of the first ones I did, and when I built it, my playstyle was pretty different. I used a lot of zoning. Kind of my thought was like, people aren't going to be looking up close at any of these things. All I really need is houses to fill out Sims so they can be riding the transit that I build. But obviously that wasn't how things worked out. And this area was perfect for that because it really has never been on camera just because of how rough it is. So I started by rebuilding some of the blocks of housing along it, getting rid of the zoning. I don't zone anything anymore, even though it's a lot slower to plot things. Once you build a nice area, you can kind of just copy paste that, and it makes just a much better result than zoning ever could. I've switched to using these houses. They're assets from King Lino. A lot of them are from the Uptown Square set, and I just really like them. They're a nice, like 2 wide by 4 deep, and they really look like kind of older American housing stock that you might find in a sort of periphery suburb. So the other part of this build was setting up some industry along it. So I started clearing a little bit of land to put sort of some legacy industries alongside the rail network, because when building these things, you have to think about, well, why does this exist? What's the point of this rail line going through here? And if it doesn't connect to anything, then it doesn't really have a purpose. And clearing land along here was just to start setting up which blocks are going to be residential and which ones could have some industry along them. And these are the ones that I'm deleting here. They'll be rebuilt as small, light factories. This recycling center asset from Avanya was really nice. I like the little wrecker yard. I was thinking one sort of industry that might belong along like a freight rail branch is some sort of scrap metal yard. So along the way, I've also been upgrading a lot of the suburban roads. I've been switching to using the Suburban Road and US Basic Road assets by Cluss. When I made this video, the US Basic Roads weren't out yet, so I used pretty much entirely these suburban roads, and I think they're really nice. They have a nice look to them. They don't have super intrusive crosswalks like the default roads do, and a lot of them don't have road markings, which I think is pretty accurate to an American city. So setting up here a bit of a siding area, just somewhere that we can park some cars that aren't in use or parked outside of a factory. I switched the entire city over to using the North American Rails mod after I made the Amshack video back in May. So everything here is North American Rails, and I really enjoy it overall. There's a couple little quirks that I found, like with the road intersections, they make that weird color sometimes. I think you'll see a couple places here where it comes through like kind of orangey. But overall, I think they're really great assets, and they've really improved the quality of the city. I mean, the bridges are just gorgeous, and I love the way they have sort of the abutments where they meet the ground. It sort of smooths over a lot of the issues that City Skylines bridges have. Here, I put down some tanker cars, and probably not the most realistic choice for here. I should probably go back and change those because there's not really much going on here that indicates like chemical storage. I mean, I built those little silos there, but that's kind of it. In all honesty, this to me more seems like some sort of scrap metal operation. And just painting the ground here, because I find when the ground is too much of that green, grassy, solid color, it doesn't really look all that realistic. And especially for an area like this where the ground's been worked over, things have been built here, just sort of having that mix of dirt and exposed rock feels a little bit more realistic and adds some variety along the way. So putting in the industry here to start with, there's going to be a couple more factories along the way, but this is kind of the start of it. Just something to go alongside here to make it make sense and say, hey, this is the reason why there's a freight line here. There's still, 2 or 3 customers that receive some shipments along it. And also along it is there's, I mentioned in the start, an auto factory in this neighborhood. And that's based on a lot of Midwestern auto factories. I kind of went around and looked at what's around them, how are they integrated into their neighborhoods. And so I hooked that up to this rail line also. I just wanted to make sure that it had some sort of purpose. And you can see the corner of the auto factory here. I rebuilt it a bit after filming this, so I think I'm also going to do a video showing that, just because I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I love seeing the freight trains interact with it. I think it's really cool, and you know, if I wanted to get really into it, I could do stuff like service vehicle selector, so it only spawns auto racks or whatever, but I'm not quite that deep. So again, just filling out housing here. After I made this block, what I started doing was copy pasting blocks, just so I'm not spending so much time getting individual houses together and building out blocks, but just moving them all over. So deleting all the old blocks, removing all the old zoned houses, and doing some sort of city maintenance, replacing the roads. Something you'll notice is that a lot of the blocks, when I deleted them and built them again, is that they tend to be bigger. And I think my earliest city blocks ended up pretty small and condensed. I planned them around like houses that were 2 or 3 tiles deep, and to make, or at least what I think, is a realistic looking American city with backyards and kind of a little bit of space between the houses, it just needs to be larger than that. So I started sizing up my blocks, and what you're seeing here is about the standard that I use for most of the city. So up here, clearing land for one more factory along this area. This one took a little bit of work to fit in. There was quite a bit I had to relocate, like this apartment area had to be kind of rebuilt and fit in. You can actually see in the corner of this, a lot of the sort of last remaining default housing is up here, and I kind of tried to give it a little bit of an upgrade, but it's still not great, but you can't fix everything. Sometimes you just gotta let it go. So for the factory itself, this is an asset from the workshop. It is one of the few custom factories for the Industries DLC. It's a rework of the electronics factory that is a little bit smaller, and I think it's honestly one of the most sort of realistic factories on there. I mean, if you go past like an electronics factory or other small factory, they don't really look like these big hulking smokestacks buildings. They're really kind of just squat and warehousey. So I really liked this one, and I chose it just because I thought, you know, this is something you could actually see in an urban neighborhood and it wouldn't look incredibly out of place. So this one I actually gave a bit of a rail spur. I wanted the line to have at least one of these rail spurs, you know, again, so it makes sense. And this one, it has a little bit of a gate, so, you know, it can close off when it's not in use. That's something I see a lot on little lightly used rail spurs. So I'm not sure exactly what would be delivered here. I just threw in some flat cars with pipes on them. So this is an electronics factory in the game, so it doesn't make a lot of sense why it would be delivering pipes, but you know, it looked good, and that's what's important. So finishing up this little yard area, just something for loading and unloading of the cars. And another reason why I wanted to build industry along here is just that there wasn't a lot of functional industry in the city, and that's kind of an area that has really been struggling as I built it. That there, first of all, wasn't a ton of zoned industry, and then after I added in industries, I didn't have a lot of production going on. And that's kind of fine. I mean, for a city like this, where it's obviously not so much the gameplay as the visual, it doesn't really matter so much if your city's making products or not. I mean, you can see that it loses like $15 million a second or whatever. But I do think it's nice to have the trucks driving around and also to have some freight traffic on your rail lines. So that was another motivator for going ahead and building this rail line, just so that the city's a little bit more functional. So the last step of building through this rail line was through this neighborhood, deleting some of the houses that were where the rail's trying to go through. I built this fence around it just so that it's sort of like right-of-way protection. I mean, I don't think it needs to be fenced off, but it kind of marks where the rail line is, and for the future, it saves some space around the edges of the rail line so that, if I went to put in a light rail or remove the tracks entirely and replace it with maybe a busway or something, or upgrade it to 2 tracks for a commuter line, there's some space on either side, so it's not going to be too crowded or just impossible to do that. Now we're at sort of the northern part of this build. The rail line does keep going, and you saw at the beginning, it links back up to another rail line and it passes by some other parts of the city on the way there, but I didn't get all that way up there, and honestly a lot of the stuff up there is also pretty old, and it would take a whole nother episode's worth of building to replace all that. So last things here, just building a little area where it kind of skirts behind this little commercial building, and I just like the appearance of that sort of going through this little bit of a weird kind of triangular area. True last thing is connecting it back to the main line. So here is the main line that goes through Washburn, or as close to through it as possible. It kind of skirts around the downtown, and this is the line that the Amtrak station is on. It's pretty close to here, and it's also the line that goes underneath the incline that you saw in the inclines episode. So a lot of traffic on this line, but like I said, to get to the other side of the city, the other line that connects up to the border, it has to make this really long journey out of its way to cross the river and then cross back and then get over there. So this little shortcut is going to help at least some of the traffic not have to take those long routes. I tried to keep it realistic still so that not every train chooses to just go through this densely populated, very small single track branch. Using Traffic Manager, I set the speed limit pretty low. I think they have to go like 25 tops through it, and then also banned passenger traffic so we don't have a bunch of intercity trains trying to snake their way through here. Alright, so that's a wrap on that build. The freight branch is complete, along with quite a bit of work on the neighborhood surrounding it. I hope you enjoyed the first episode in this little side building series. I really enjoyed getting to show off some of the stuff that doesn't normally make it on camera. I think I'm going to make these episodes available early for patrons, maybe a week or 2 in advance. So if you want to see them ahead of everyone else, you can head over to Patreon and become a patron there. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed these, and if you have any ideas for other builds to do. I think the next builds that I'm going to show off are going to be the auto factory that I mentioned in this episode, and building a little bit of a stub highway through this same neighborhood. So subscribe to stay up to date on these builds and the main failure and success of Great American Transit series. Follow me on Twitter, and thanks for watching.